Hello everyone, and welcome to my Soap Twist 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Luna Nozawa's life in Harmony, surrounded by rolling hills and whispering pines, has always been a careful mix of hopes and realities. She was a young woman with a lovely temperament, and her eyes bore the weight of unspoken hopes. She spent her days as an assistant designer at Forrester Creations, a fashion firm brimming with drama and ambition. Luna's doodles reflected her ingenuity, but her heart was frequently eclipsed by the larger-than-life characters around her. Among them was Lee Finnegan, a talented but intense doctor with a strong maternal instinct and a reputation for stubbornness. Luna and Lee's relationship has always been difficult. Lee, the mother of Luna's ex-boyfriend Finn, had never really welcomed her. She thought she was too sensitive and fragile for the competitive world of fashion and the complex web of relationships that define their social circle. Despite their differences, Luna sought to keep the peace, often swallowing her pride to avoid confrontation. But beneath her serene facade, a storm was brewing, one that would result in a disaster no one could predict. It was a late autumn evening, the air crisp and heavy with the aroma of fallen leaves. The Forrester Creations workplace was abnormally quiet, with the typical bustle of activity replaced by an unsettling silence. Luna had stayed late to finish a design, her fingers covered in charcoal after hours of sketching. She was alone in the studio, or so she thought, until the door cracked open and Lee entered. The elder woman's face was a mask of barely restrained rage, her eyes flashing with such intensity that Luna's pulse skipped a beat. "Luna," Lee began quietly and sharply, "we need to talk." Luna placed down her pencil, her hands quivering slightly. "Lee, I wasn't expecting you here. Is everything okay?" Lee's lips formed a sour smile. "Okay? No, nothing is fine. You've been meddling where you don't belong, causing problems for my son." Luna's brow wrinkled. She hadn't communicated with Finn in weeks since their separation. "I do not comprehend. I haven't done anything. Do not lie to me," Lee snapped, moving closer. Her hands tightened into fists by her sides. "I understand you've been chatting to him and filling his head with crap. He's confused, Luna, and it's because of you." Luna jumped up, her chair scratching against the floor. "I swear, Lee, I haven't said anything to Finn. I've been focusing on my work. I'm trying to move on." But Lee didn't listen. Her rage had grown over weeks, spurred by stories and her own concerns about losing control of her son's life. She viewed Luna as a threat, a reminder of all she couldn't manage. Without suddenly, she surged forward, putting her hands around Luna's throat. Luna screamed as she clawed at Lee's wrists, taken aback by the attack's suddenness. "Lee, stop." Luna coughed, her voice scarcely audible. The tightness on her throat tightened, and panic swept over her. She lurched backward, smacking the edge of a table. The room whirled, and her vision blurred as she strained to breathe. Lee's face distorted with wrath, her grip firm. Luna's basic instincts snapped at that moment. She wasn't thinking or calculating. Her body operated on instinct. Her hands flailed, looking for a way to defend herself. Her fingers wrapped around a hefty glass paperweight on the table, the flat surface cold against her palm. With a desperate yell, she swung it upward, attempting to shove Lee away. The paperweight struck Lee's temple with a terrible thump. Lee's grasp eased suddenly, her body trembling and her eyes widening with surprise. She staggered backward, groping for her head, but it was too late. Her knees buckled, and she fell to the floor, blood pooling beneath her head. Luna dropped the paperweight, her hands quivering violently. "Oh my God," she said softly, her voice breaking. She knelt beside Lee, her fingertips hovering over the elder woman's lifeless body. "Lee? Lee, please wake up." But Lee did not stir. Her chest was still, and her eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. Luna sobbed as she realized what had happened. She had not intended to kill her. She hadn't intended for any of this. It was an accident, a survival situation gone tragically wrong. The following several hours were a haze. Luna sat on the floor, knees drawn to her chest, staring at Lee's body with tears streaming down her cheek. She knew she needed to call someone and speak the truth, but fear stopped her. What would they say? Will they believe it was an accident? The Forrester family wielded considerable authority, and Lee was a respected person. Luna, with her calm manner and history of being misjudged, felt insignificant in comparison. She eventually pushed herself to stand, her legs quivering as she reached for the phone. Her fingers stumbled as she dialed 911, and her voice was barely steady when she spoke with the operator. "There's been an accident," she explained, her words flat. "Someone is harmed. Please come immediately." The police arrived quickly, their flashing lights creating ominous shadows across the studio. Luna remained still as they studied the situation, their queries cutting through the fog of her shock. She told them everything: how Lee had attacked her, how she had responded in self-defense, and how the paperweight had fallen from her grasp in a fit of fear. Even as she talked, she could sense suspicion in their eyes. The news spread like wildfire over Harmony and beyond. By dawn, the headlines screamed calamity at Forrester Creations. "Local doctor killed in altercation," one stated. "Fashion assistant involved in fatal incident," another reported. The town was buzzing with gossip, with some dubbing Luna a victim and others casting her as a criminal. The Forrester family, devastated and enraged, wanted justice, but Luna's friends rallied behind her, believing she would never purposefully injure anyone. Luna's life unraveled in the days that followed. She was sent on leave from Forrester Creations, and her designs remained unfinished on her desk. Reporters gathered outside her little flat, their cameras flashing any time she walked out. She couldn't shake the murmurs, stares, and continuous memories of that night. Her hopes of becoming a famous designer evaporated, replaced with nightmares about Lee's lifeless eyes. The legal system acted swiftly. Luna's counsel argued self-defense, citing injuries on her neck and statements from coworkers who had witnessed Lee's rising anger toward her. However, the prosecution painted a different picture, one of a deliberate conduct by a young woman determined to remove an impediment in her path. The trial was a spectacle, with every aspect scrutinized by the media and the public. As the weeks grew into months, Luna tried to maintain her sense of self. She spent hours writing in a journal, expressing her remorse, dread, and despair. She wrote about Lee, the lady she had never quite understood, and the moment that changed everything. She wrote on the significance of her acts and how a single second had changed her life. She did not anticipate forgiveness, not from the Forresters, Finn, or herself. The courtroom was crowded on the day of the verdict. Luna sat calmly, hands held securely in her lap, while the jurors announced their verdict, not guilty. Murmurs erupted around the room, with some relieved and others enraged. Luna felt no victory. Her acquittal released her from prison, but not from the prison of her own thoughts. She left Harmony soon after, unable to face the memories that persisted throughout the village. She relocated to a quiet coastal community, away from the splendor and bustle of Forrester Creations. There, she lived quietly, working as a seamstress, her once ambitious goals stashed away like old sketches in a drawer. She avoided the news, the internet, and everything that could bring back memories of that night. However, the weight of it never left her. Luna grew older, her hair gray, her eyes filled with a peaceful sadness. She never talked about Harmony, Lee, or the life she'd left behind. But late at night, when everything was quiet, she would sit by her window, staring out at the ocean, wondering if she could ever forgive herself for a moment that had been both her salvation and her undoing. Luna's story was ultimately about survival rather than triumph or atonement. She carried her pain like a shadow, a constant companion guiding her every move. Even though she found serenity in the rhythm of her needle and thread, the memory of that terrible night would never go away. It was a reminder that even the most delicate hearts might be pushed to the brink, and that sometimes the cost of survival was a never-healing wound. Lee's face would never leave her thoughts. Her aunt's eyes were filled with rage, and her hands had locked around Luna's throat in a grip that was both terrifying and heartbreaking. Lee wasn't meant to be the villain in her life. She had been severe, rigid, and occasionally chilly, but she was family. Wasn't family supposed to protect you? That was what Luna had assumed when she first arrived in Los Angeles and entered the dazzling but dangerous world of the Forestos. But everything had escalated so swiftly, as if fate had been waiting for the right moment to tip the scales and bring everything crashing down. Lee never really approved of her. To Lee, Luna was a mistake, a stain that needed to be removed. Luna had attempted to prove herself worthy of love and belonging. She worked hard, listened, and bent beneath the weight of expectations until she feared she was going to break. And yet, it was never enough. The confrontation that night had not been planned. Luna had gone to Lee's apartment out of desperation, not anger. She had hoped for answers, some kind of understanding. But the words had become sharper, and the room had heated up with each utterance. Lee's charges were as sharp as knives, implying shame and weakness and Luna's inability to measure up. And then Lee's hands were on her throat, squeezing and crushing the air from her lungs. Luna panicked in those few seconds. Her body reacted before her intellect caught up. She clawed, pushed, and struggled to breathe. She then shoved Lee with all of her strength, without thinking or recognizing it. Lee staggered, hit the table's edge, and collapsed on the floor. The subsequent silence was worse than the conflict itself. The immobility of Lee's body, the unusual angle of her neck, the finality in her unblinking eyes, it was unbearable. Luna now sat alone, the weight of the moment crushing her chest with each breath. Tears streamed down her cheeks, hot and persistent, yet they brought no relief. She wanted to shout, but her voice was cracked and strangled with shame. She considered calling someone, RJ perhaps. Did he love her? He would like to help. But how does she explain this? How could she tell him she had killed someone he admired, someone close to his family, even if it had been an accident? She remembered her mother, Poppy, who had always told her to be quiet and hidden. Would Poppy trust her, or would she dismiss this as just another failure, another disaster to throw under the rug? The apartment walls appeared to close in tighter, choking her with memories. She noticed Lee's severe expression at family gatherings, and how she had treated Luna like an intruder, an unwanted guest at a table that was never supposed to be hers. She also remembered the unusual softness, the tiny moment when Lee almost smiled at her and Luna wondered if she could gain her acceptance. But it was all gone now, buried in the stillness of one irreversible act. Luna curled up against herself, arms wrapped over her knees, rocking slightly as if the motion could transport her back in time, before the fight, before the rage. She muttered Lee's name into the darkness, her voice shaking. I didn't mean to hurt you. But the walls didn't respond, and the darkness didn't provide solace. Sleep would not come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lee fall again, the sound of her body hitting the floor ringing like a harsh refrain. She forced her eyes to open until they burned, till dawn broke through the slats, casting the room in a faint light that felt almost mocking. Another day passed, but Luna's world had stopped spinning. When she eventually dragged herself to the mirror, she could barely recognize the girl staring back. Her eyes were puffy and red-rimmed, her hair matted, and her skin pallid, as if the blood had drained from her. She flinched when she touched her throat, which was still hurting from Lee's grip. The reflection appeared to accuse her, whispering that she was no longer innocent. She had passed an uncrossable line. Her phone buzzed on the counter, jolting her out of the trance. A message from RJ appeared on the screen. Hey, I miss you. I haven't heard from you. Are you okay? Her fingers trembled as they moved over the screen. She wanted to respond, to pour her heart out, to ask him to hold her and assure her she wasn't a monster. But what if he turns away? What if he looked at her with the disgust Lee had in her eyes? The concept was awful. So she put down the phone, the words unsent, and fell back into stillness. The hours merged together. She moved from room to room like a ghost, unable to focus or eat. Her imagination repeated every second of that night in terrible detail, twisting the knife deeper with each memory. She considered phoning the police and confessing everything. Perhaps they'd see it was self-defense. Perhaps they'd believe her. But the sight of cold steel bars and scornful looks held her in place. How could she exist inside walls, deprived of her freedom and the frail hope she still held? However, how could she live like this, bearing the secret alone? The city outside carried on, as if nothing had changed. Cars buzzed by, people laughed on the walkways, and the world spun on without regard for Luna's destroyed life. She pressed her forehead against the window glass, watching the lives below, and felt her solitude deepen. She was confined in a cage of her own devising, invisible to everyone but burdened with a truth too great to bear. As night fell again, she found herself back in the corner, embracing her knees and murmuring excuses to the shadows. She remembered Lee's final moments, the hatred that had contorted her features. But was there any fear beneath the anger? Regret? Did Lee comprehend in those final seconds how much Luna desired her love? The questions clawed at her, but she received no answers. Days passed in a blur, each one heavier than the previous. RJ began to call more frequently, leaving worried voice messages. "Luna, please talk to me. I am afraid. Just let me know you're okay." His words were soothing, yet they ripped at her heart. She wanted to run to him and throw herself in his arms, but she couldn't. The truth sat between them like an immovable, frigid wall. One night, she stood at the pier's edge, the ocean stretched out before her like a huge unknown. The waves slammed against the wood, and the salty wind irritated her eyes. She considered leaping forward, letting the water swallow her and whisk her away from the burden of shame. It would be so simple. One step, and the silence would be total. But then she remembered RJ, his smile, and how nicely his hand fit with hers. She recalled the visions they had shared late at night, of a future filled with love and opportunity. Could she actually take that away from him? Can she leave him with only questions and pain? Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the ground, sobbing into her hands. She wanted to live, but she wasn't sure how to deal with what she'd done. The city lights in the distance flashed indifferently to her sadness. Luna recognized that this was her punishment, not prison bars or judgment from strangers, but the never-ending, crushing burden of recollection. She'd keep Lee with her forever, in every breath, dream, and heartbeat. The world would never know the entire story. To them, Luna would be the sweet girl with a shadowy grin. But inwardly, she would always be plagued by that night, by the instant her hands turned into weapons, by the truth she could never forget. So she went back from the dock, each step heavier than the last, bearing a burden that time could not remove. She would carry on because she had no other option. But the girl she had been, the innocent, hopeful Luna, had vanished. In her place stood someone broken, marred by pain. She whispered Lee's name into the dark night sky. It was all she had left to give: remembrance, regret, and the faint hope that Lee could hear and comprehend her. The stars above did not respond, but she continued to whisper. She would whisper for the rest of her life.